history video. I have now finished the course, so today I am hoping to pass on a bit of advice to students who are on their own AP journey. So here it is. Theoretical and practical tips for getting the historical complexity point, and why you should try. Many instructional videos you watch about AP World essays will dismiss the historical complexity point by saying something along the lines of, "You won't get it, so don't try." However, if you are ambitious and dreaming of capturing this point, be of good hope. The historical complexity point is not merely a delusion of grandeur. However, to be clear, this point is very hard to get. It takes effort and a complex way of thinking about what you are writing. However, the purpose of this video is to make getting the historical complexity point seem more manageable and worthwhile. So let's get started. By way of contextualization, here's a brief explanation of the historical complexity point. The historical complexity point is given for essays that show a complex understanding of the topic. You're essentially running circles around the topic and showing off at this point. Just think of the warfare of the Mongols. The rest of what the rubric has to say about it is essentially a laundry list of ways to obtain this point, which we will dive into later. For now, the main things to get out of this are analyzing, continually explaining why, how, and what resulted, synthesis, identifying and explaining something similar to a point you are writing about that occurred in another time period, and describing nuances, which are distinctions and exceptions. That said, here are some theoretical and practical tips for getting the historical complexity point. A good theoretical tip for getting this point is not necessarily to memorize the rubric. It is instead getting in the mindset. Getting this point will be easier if during your essay you are actively thinking about your evidence points. How is this more complex? What does this connect to? How can I essentially show off and explain a little bit more about why this happened? A tip for getting into the mindset is to accept the fact that pretty much everything is complex and nothing in history is black and white. If you write with this in mind, you will catch complexity that you hadn't before. This is part of the reason why it can be so hard to get. You have to actually know things about your topic and your main evidence points, and sometimes broader history to offer any complexity. However, sometimes it just comes down to logical common sense analysis. Once you get into the mindset, you will begin to weave in complexity without necessarily thinking about whether it is synthesis or nuance or etc. However, not only is this in a sense a starting point, it is an ending point as well. So let's dive into the building blocks of historical complexity. For practical ways to get this point, or in other words, the actual things you are doing to get this point, let's head back to the rubric. So you pretty much have analysis, synthesis, and nuance, as I mentioned before. Analysis consists of explaining why, how, or what resulted. An example of the why would be, Germany suffered greatly during the Great Depression because they were forced to pay war reparations because of the Treaty of Versailles, because the Allies blamed Germany for starting the war, because they took the first aggressive move with their Schlieffen Plan, and they had the Schlieffen Plan because they didn't like France, and that goes back to the Franco-Prussian War. I think you get the picture. For an example of what resulted, let's say you were doing the DBQ from the 2014 national exam about the relationship between Chinese peasants and the Communist Party. Let's say a document was talking about how the Communist Party confiscated land and collectivized it. You could add that an effect of this was that it de-incentivized the peasants and led to decreased agricultural output and famines. Analysis is sometimes simply over-explaining. As for synthesis, an example would be to say that South Africa's apartheid system was similar to America's Jim Crow laws, although it was more brutal. An example of a nuance would be to say that the European Union's members all follow a common currency, with the exception of the United Kingdom. A tip is to avoid words that are definitive and allow no room for complexity, like always. Keywords and phrases to include in your essay for complexity are ones like exception, however, most of the time, or to a moderate extent. As a note, these are not the only options for how to get this point. There are a few other suggestions on the rubric, so if you'd like to, go check those out too. Now that we've looked at ways to get this point, here's why you should try. The extra explaining that historical complexity requires is a good way to discover truly how well you understand a topic, which is a nice surprise, and it sets you up for success in numerous places in the AP World course. It also helps you to better understand a topic by forcing you to consider its complex aspects. Additionally, a less inspirational reason, but one just as practical, is that this point can be a good fallback in order to still get a 5 in an LEQ if you happen to miss the contextualization or thesis point. It happens. Also, getting a 6 on an LEQ or a 7 on a DBQ is a very satisfying thing because it shows you how truly well you understood the prompt and what you were writing about. To sum it up, historical complexity is hard and complicated, but attainable by getting in the mindset and remembering to always explain everything. By way of conclusion, I'd like to share a way in which some of God's story was revealed to me through this topic. God's story includes many different angles, such as creation, fallenness, and restoration. Any given situation can have all of these aspects. Historical complexity resembles this by showing all the different aspects of a situation, both good and bad. I hope this video was clarifying and helpful to you even in a little way in your AP journey. Best of luck and have fun with it. Farewell.